and welcome to Equivalent Fractions and Decimals. Go ahead and open up your notebooks to the next clean page. We're going to be talking today about finding decimals and fractions and then their equivalent opposites. So an equivalent decimal to a given fraction or an equivalent fraction to a given decimal. Go ahead and write down your I can statement. I can recognize and generate common fractions and equivalent decimals. Pause the video while you write that down. All right, we've heard this word before, equivalent. What do you think this word means again? Let's review. Equal. Yes, that's right. So let's talk about common fractions and brainstorm some common fractions, common meaning something that you see very often. What would be probably the most common fraction that you think of right off the top of your head? Maybe 1/2 or 1/4, or another common fraction might be 1/3. We also have 1/5 and 1/10. So those are going to be some very common fractions that you see frequently. There are others, but these ones are going to be the most common, and then also with some changing of the numerator. So 1/4, we might also have 3/4, and 1/3, we might also have 2/3 as a common fraction. Remember that fractions are just a way to show a division problem. So what that means is, when I have a fraction that looks like this, 1/2, what that really says is 1 divided by 2. So this one was really saying 1 divided by 4, 1 divided by 3, 1 divided by 5, and 1 divided by 10. So it's the numerator. This line means divided by, and then the denominator. How do I find the decimal equivalent? So if it's not one of those easy, right, comes to your memory very quickly, then you have to do the Cowboy method that we talked about. So let's stick with 1/2. Remember, 1/2 means 1 divided by 2, so let's set it up. Here's my 1/2, and I have my cowboy. So the cowboy, that's going to be this numerator, rides the horse. That's my denominator. The cowboy goes inside the house. Okay, he takes off his boots, he hangs up his hat, and he eats 3 donuts. So let's pretend these are the 3 donuts. And remember, the horse stays outside the house. So what we're going to do now is solve this problem like a division problem, and that will give us the decimal, the equal decimal to 1/2. When we're dividing with a decimal, you just pretend that that decimal isn't even there. We're going to bring it right up into our quotient line, and then we just kind of forget about it. Pretend it's not there for now. So rather than having 2 go into 1, which we know we can't do, now you can pretend 2 goes into the smallest number, 10. How many times does 2 go into 10? 5 times. Now just solve it like a regular long division problem. So 5 times 2 equals 10, and then what do I do next? Subtract. So I have 10 minus 10 equals 0. And remember, zeros are just placeholders, so we don't need to bring this down and continue on because it's just going to end up being 0, 0, 0, and it's just a placeholder. So now we have our decimal equivalent. 1/2 is equal to 5/10. So that means if I had half a pizza or I had 5/10 of a pizza, I would be getting the exact same amount. These are the same. They represent the same amount of something. So let's look at some uncommon fractions and decimals. This would be not a fraction that you see very often, or not a decimal that you see very often. So the easiest way to figure out how to write it as a fraction is just to read it. How would we read this number here? That would be 6/10. So then you think, 6/10. How would I write that as a fraction? And you just go with this number, 6 as the numerator, and then the place value, tenths, it's in the tenths place value, so we put 10 as the denominator. Easy. 6/10 is equal to 6/10. So let's try this one. 34 hundredths is how we read that number. How would we write that fraction? 34 hundredths. 34 over 100. Okay, so let's work the other way. If I have a fraction like 4 tenths and another fraction 88 hundredths, how would I write these as a decimal? You're going to use the exact same method that we did for turning a decimal into a fraction. Now we're just going to take 4 tenths and think, how would I write that as a decimal? And it would be 0.4. The 4 is in the tenths place value. 4 tenths is equal to 4 tenths. And the same thing with 88 hundredths. How would I write that as a decimal? 0.88. 88 hundredths is the place value name. Let's do a practice check. I want you to find the equivalent decimal for this fraction right here, and I'm not going to read it and give away the answer. See if you can figure out how to write the decimal. Then I want you to find the equivalent fraction for this decimal, and you must simplify the fraction to get full credit. Remember, we've talked a lot about simplifying fractions and finding equivalent fractions for other fractions. Go ahead and pause the video while you work that out. If you're not ready for the answers, then pause the video because they're going to get given away. This fraction is 25 hundredths. So how would we write that decimal? 0.25, 25 hundredths. And the equivalent fraction for 2 tenths is 2 tenths. But I said you had to simplify it to receive full credit. If you look at 2 and 10, what do you know about those numbers? Hopefully you recognize 2 is an even number and 10 is an even number, which means they can both be divided by 2. So if we divide 2 by 2 and 10 by 2, we get 1/5. So 1/5 is your final full credit answer. If you got 2 tenths but you couldn't figure out how to simplify, you get half credit. Okay, write down any questions you have, anything that is bothering you still, or anything you're still wondering about, and we'll go over it in class tomorrow. If you did not get the practice checks correct, then go back and rewatch the video and see how I turned fractions like this into decimals like this. Have a good night.